Hi friends, and welcome back into my studio. If you are new here, my name is Tammy Ernest and I am a long-arm quilter, and here on my channel I like to share customer finishes as well as my own personal projects. Today is January 1st. I hope you had a wonderful Christmas holiday with your family and friends, lots of gatherings and special times, and I hope that you are ready to start the new year off right. I love new beginnings. I think I'm a goal planner, and I just love resolutions, whether you call them that or not, and new plans and new starts, and just absolutely love the first of the year. And so I'm excited for January, and it just feels like a clean slate and ready to get going. So hope you feel that way too. Today on the video here today, I'm doing a question and answer. And so I had asked several months ago for you to send in questions that you might have. Anything you want to do, whether it's about family, my business, about long arming, supplies, anything goes. And so I do have several pages here full of questions, and I'm excited to get started in answering those for you. And I thought I would just start off and tell you a little bit about myself. If you are newer here, I'm sure you've picked up information here and there, but I just wanted to share about my family, where I'm at, my business, and all that, just some general things. So my name is Tammy, and I run the long arm business. I have had the business since about 2011, I want to say. I really need to write it down so I have a whole time frame on paper so I don't have to keep rethinking it every time. But quite a few years, and I do have some earlier videos where I go through some of my history, and I will find those and link those down below. But long story short, I absolutely love quilting. I am the mom of 7 children, all of whom we homeschooled, at least for part of their schooling. The last 6 totally from first through 12th grade. The first one went through several years of primary school. Is that a primary school? What do you call it? Grade school. That's what I was trying to think of. Grade school before we actually pulled him out and finished homeschooling him all the way through high school. So the other 6 have all been homeschooled, and really enjoyed that whole process. But I'm always one that's always had something going on the back burner. And if you've heard me talk about before, our proverbial pumpkin patch, or even before the proverbial pumpkin patch, when we still lived in town, I've always done something on the side. I'm just one of those that doesn't sit still very often. And so even when the older kids were younger, I had a typing business that I did from home. My kids always come first. So my family and children always come first. So even prior to getting married, I did work as a legal assistant for a while and a secretary for a while. But anyway, once family started, I did have a typing business that I did from home, a transcription business that I did from home for a while. We moved to the country out here in 2000, spring of 2000, and we've been here ever since. And really, once we moved out here, I stopped that typing business and picked up quilting as a hobby in about, I was pregnant with Joseph, so 2002. He was born in 2003. So that's about the time I picked up quilting, and just quickly, like many of you, fell down that rabbit hole and began long arm quilting when I bought a machine in 2009 or 2010, and then began quilting for clients in 2011. So I've had the business for quite a while, but it's always been on the back burner, and it's really just been in the last couple years that it has become more of a full-time occupation in many ways, but which is great timing because my kids are now grown and most of them are out of the house. So we have lived on our farm since 2000 and absolutely love being in the country. Well, I tell people I love the country except for January and February, when it's cold and snowy and hard to get out sometimes, but I really enjoy the country and a great place to raise our family. We are in west central Indiana. I have lived here my entire life, within an hour of where I'm at now. Always lived in Indiana. My husband is also an Indiana native. We met in church when we were both in our early 20s and have been married for 33 years. I do not remember. I can remember dates, so I know the year I was married, but I still have to do the calculation every time. And same way with ages and things like that. So we do have 7 children and currently have 5 grandchildren. Our oldest son is named Kyle. He is married to Kimberly. They have 3 boys. The older 2 are 14 and 12, and they just had a new baby in April of this year, so they have a little one also, and we are sure enjoying all 3 of those guys. They live within 15 minutes of us, so close. We get to see them and spend holidays with them and get to see them quite often. Our second born is Holly, and she lives within an hour of us as well. Or a little farther out, but she's about an hour away, and she is married to Seth. They had their first baby in May of this year, and that is little Ellie, and love spending time with the only granddaughter that we have so far. The next born is Emily, and she was married in June of this year to Jonathan. They also live about an hour away, but in the total opposite direction of her older sister Holly. Jonathan and Emily are both teachers. Jonathan is a band teacher, beautiful musician. I mean, the guy can play the piano like nothing, and he works in a Christian school teaching private piano lessons and also band classes. And then Emily took over as their daycare director when the school year started here. So they're both enjoying that. Maggie is the next born, and she got married in October to Spencer, and they have moved to Minnesota and doing very, very well up there. The next in line is Joseph, and he is married to Rhiannon. They also had their first baby this year, and little Dallas was born at the end of September and doing very well. They're the closest of everybody that lives to us. They're probably only 10 minutes away. Joseph is a farmer in our area, so especially during planting and harvesting season, we'll see him in the fields right around our house here. So the closest of all of the kids, just about 10 minutes away. Next born is Daniel. He is a college student at Maranatha Baptist University up in Watertown, Wisconsin, studying video and video production, communication arts, and he's a beautiful singer, also doing a minor in music up there. Our last born is Stephen. Stephen is now 18 years old, and Stephen is a special guy. He absolutely loves music as loud as he can play it. He has begun horseback riding lessons this year and is enjoying that. He also loves his night of volleyball with his friends every Monday night, so he is a special guy. And I really have loved being his mom. And so then my husband, Greg, he has been in the insurance business before I was around. So he has been an agent for the past 30 years. Prior to that, he was a claims adjuster and some other things in the insurance industry. But God has provided well for our family through his job as an insurance agent, and I sure appreciate him and his support of me and my wild, crazy hobbies that I've been in over the years, and then supporting me in running a business from home. Like I said earlier, my kids and my family always come first, and so even with the business, I've always tried to find something that I did from home, never full-time until just the last couple years when the kids have gotten older and married and out of the house and doing their own thing. But it's always just been something I did on the side, especially with homeschooling the kids. But the businesses, we've always had something going because we felt it was important to give our kids kind of that small business mindset, entrepreneurship, if they ever wanted to get into that. So that's the whole idea of the proverbial pumpkin patch. It kept them busy during the summertime, but taught them those skills of dealing with the public and pricing your product and presenting a good product and displaying it nicely and advertising and all of that, customer service. And so that was something that we ran from home. I was able to do that with the kids, and over the years have gotten more and more into the Longarm quilting. So that's a little bit about our family, where we live. Our farm is just a hobby farm. We currently have 3 cows, 2 goats, a dog, 2 cats, 3 chickens, that kind of thing. So just a hobby farm, and but love living out here. So how about we move on to some of your questions that you sent in. I'm going to kind of work through, some of them were about just my filming and YouTube and editing and all that. Then I will move into some of my time management. Then we'll go on to some long arm, more specific questions, photography, presentation of quilts, some binding, and then just some general things as well. So that's kind of where we're headed today. So I will just start out. The first question that I have was an anonymous question. It was sent in and asked, how does your check-in work? So probably prior to YouTube, I would say 90% of my business was local. After YouTube began, it has totally flip-flopped. And right now I would say about 80% of my business comes from mailed-in quilts, about 20% comes from local people. And it was crazy how that happened, and but I'm so enjoying it. I get to meet so many of you from around the country, and it's a wonderful way, but that means that I'm getting a lot of packages in. And so basically how that works, when a quilt arrives, usually by mail, or even when I meet with a client, then it is added into my queue. And I kind of showed you that a little bit on my video last week when we did the sewing room tour. So it's added into the next available spot. I have so many spots available for each week, and so that quilt is added in there. Then I also have a numbering system. So on my queue, the quilt is given a number. I write that number on their intake form as well. And then I also add that number. I bought these are kind of like your, what do they call, the coat check type of things. And so this has a little hole at the top, and I hang the quilts on hangers. I like to get them out of the boxes as soon as I can. I do hang them on some thick rounded hangers, not wire hangers or anything, something that's a little thicker. I usually like to put the batting first, then the backing, and then the quilt top as the top piece. If there's no batting, I'll tell you about cutting batting in a little bit, but then I hang them on a hanger, and the hanger is given a number. This number is then, it also matches the number in my queue. It also matches the number that I list on their intake form. I didn't bring an intake form with me, but it's what you would print out and send along with your quilt. So those quilts are hung up. At the time that I do receive a quilt, if it's a mail-in quilt, I do email the client and tell them that their quilt has arrived. If I have time at that moment, I will confirm a pantograph as well. Sometimes the intake process, I'm just getting all those quilts out of boxes and hung up, and then when it gets closer to time to actually do the long arming is when I'll confirm a pantograph with them. Some clients tell me the pantograph they want, others are asking for suggestions, and so prior to quilting, I'll send them an email again with some suggestions on possible pantographs, and we'll confirm that later. So that's how a quilt is brought in, and then it's on the queue. It goes in the closet. You saw the closet last week that's upstairs, and that's where I keep all of them. I really found this number system to help basically so that when it's time to do a quilt, I don't have to look at the names on all of the they're usually in order, but that way I don't have to look at the names on every one of the pages. I'm just looking for a number on the hanger. It's a very quick way to pull down if I'm downstairs, or even if I send somebody else up there. I need quilts 51 through 54 brought down. Anybody can do that. Stephen or Daniel or my husband, any of them can go up there, bring those quilts down. They're not looking for certain names and things. It also helps if for some reason that sheet of paper, the intake form, falls off, whatever, lands on the floor. I still have that quilt marked by a number. And also in my queue, where I have written down the number, I have the client's name. I also have a description of the quilt. So I ensure in many different ways that I'm not getting quilts mixed up, that I'm not, that the right quilt is on the right hanger. Each one is numbered. If the sheet should come off of the hanger, I have it marked in my queue what the name of that quilt was. and that kind of thing, which matches what's on the sheet, which then I can tell which quilt that is. So that I try to ensure many different ways that the quilt is marked, and rarely does that sheet come off, and I'm not going to lose 2 or 3 sheets at once. It would be one sheet would fall off, and that means that one hanger is missing a sheet. So that's not a big deal, but I do want to ensure that every quilt is taken care of, and that that it's well maintained and kept until it's time to do the quilting. So these were a great find. I found those on Amazon. I can link those for you if you're wanting some way to do a numbering system. So that's how the check-in works. If I meet with a client personally, it really runs the same way. It's just I will, usually in person, I will confirm pantographs right there when I meet someone and not wait for an email later. It just depends. I always confirm the quilts when they arrive, but I may not confirm a pantograph choice at that time. It just depends on how many come in at once when I'm loading, the hangers and getting them hung up and things like that. So then the next question, also from Anonymous, says, do you film your YouTube episodes alone? And yes, I do, except for the quilt room tours. Daniel has been on the camera behind those because he can use the gimbal, is that what you call it, so that it's a smooth, moving and not jerky and anything. So those have to be done with somebody else because he's following me around. The YouTube videos I do here, you kind of saw my setup last week in the quilt room video, is I have the ring light, I have other lights up, and I try to make it super easy. So all I have to do is lay out the quilts that I'm showing you that day on the long arm, and boom, I can start right away. If you remember, when I was in my other area upstairs, it was a lot more of when I had my long arm upstairs, then I would also film in this room, but it was our bedroom. And so, it's a whole process to make sure all of your personal stuff is out of the way and you're seeing what you want to see. And so this has been much simpler. So I do film the YouTube episodes by myself. I also do all my own editing. And again, Daniel has been instrumental in helping me do that. I originally just filmed on my phone, edited on my phone, uploaded to YouTube on my phone. It quickly became apparent that it's a lot for a phone to handle, to upload all of that. So I did invest in a Mac laptop last year. Was it earlier in 20? It was either early 2023 or late 2022 is when I did that. And so by purchasing a Mac, my videos that I film on my phone automatically are on my Mac, and I do all the editing in iMovie, and so it's all done on my own. I have thought about hiring out my editing, but if I did that, it would have to be somebody that was a quilter, because sometimes you mess up the things you say, it's like I call a product one thing when it's not really that, or that's not the kind of block that is, and I need to edit something out, so I've just not done that. Daniel is a great editor, but he's busy with school, and then, does he understand the quilting side of it? And so I've not hired out the editing, and maybe at some point, but I don't know. I don't know. Whether I'm a control freak, I don't know. It could be bad, I guess. But I like my hands on. I like to remember what I'm saying and what goes out, and quality control. I really am picky about what goes out, and so I do all the editing of myself. And then the final question from Anonymous was, what was the beautiful music? And that was just a free, if you've done any editing in iMovie, especially on a phone, you're given some free options of music. And that was one that I picked. When you're putting music on a video, you're setting the tone for the video. And my personality is much more traditional, much more calm, and I'm not a big fun, playful, I'm not vibrant, I'm not I don't know, all those. I'm just a little more subdued. You can see it in my clothing. You can see it in just my house and everything. The quilts I like the muted colors. I like the classic, traditional, and that's just me. And our family, my girls all play piano. Actually, all three of our grandsons play piano. Grandsons, see, that's where I messed up. All three of our sons-in-law play piano. We are a very musical family. My husband and I have no musical talent at all. My husband likes to joke the only thing he can play is the radio, and we really, honestly, now my husband's has people in his family that can sing, so I'm only assuming that that's what passed down to our kids. But we did invest in our kids in all of their growing up years in piano lessons and music lessons, and just wanted to give them that foundation. And so in picking music for my video, I wanted to go with something that was kind of like our family style. The kids have sung in choirs, they play piano, and I just like that more style of a music. So the song that I picked is called The Moment. The song is called The Moment, and that is done by Robert Miller. I do not know anything about Robert Miller. I don't know where, if that was a one-time thing. I've not done any research at all. All I did was go through the free options on iMovie and pick out the one that I felt best matched me and matched my personality, matched the tone of the video that I wanted to be putting out on YouTube. So that is the music, and I do hear all the time from viewers how they love the music and how it's calming, and that just thrills me that it's become connected into that introductory showing of the quilts and things, and that just really sets the tone. I just want you to come in, it's like we're just sitting down and chatting, and I'm kind of showing you what I've got going on. I wish it was reciprocal, and I could see what you're working on, and that's kind of why I started the Quilt Circle membership, is so that I can see what you're working on and we can share ideas and that kind of thing. But the videos here are one-sided, but I really wanted to set the tone of we're just getting together and chatting. I'm not going to blast you with color. I'm not going to blast you with craziness. This is just very calm, relaxing, and you can come in and be working on your quilting or working on your cross stitch and just join me for a while each week. So that's where the music came from. Let's move on to time management and scheduling. Now, I said from the beginning, I love new beginnings. I love a good blank planner. I love to write things out. Time management is, and maybe because I love those things, I'm able to get a lot done, but man, do I feel always pressed for time, and I'm constantly reworking my schedule, and I am constantly trying to revamp and figure out how to do it more efficient. So let me tackle some of these questions. Pauline asked, how do you fit everything into your day? I don't. I absolutely do not. And many times I am ironing a shirt for my husband so that he can wear it to work that day, just to be honest. I don't. I do not fit everything into every day. I try to keep a cleaning schedule so that I have certain chores that I do every day. Sometimes I don't get that done, and I'm catching up at the end of the week. I do try to keep the kitchen clean at the end of the night, and my husband has been a big help in that. And I don't get everything done every day. I love to plan, and I think because I plan, I get more done than I would if I just left it to chance. But as a type A personality, as a planner, I put way too much on every day than is ever going to get done, and then I get discouraged and feel like I'm behind. And sometimes I just got to focus on what I did get done and not what I didn't get done. But my plans are always much bigger. My goals for the day and for the week and for the month and for the year are always much bigger than I have. I have so many interests, whether it's long arming my own quilting, cross stitch, reading, exercise, and that's gone by the wayside. Literally. Too much this year because I've been busy. So I just want to start out and say I do not fit everything into my day, but I try. Wanda asked, do you have set days and hours that you quilt? And I would say yes and no. I usually quilt Monday through Friday, but I don't have set hours per se. It depends on what's going on. So again, I told you at the beginning that my family comes first, and so if the kids call and say, could you watch Ellie because we need to go Christmas shopping, I say absolutely yes, and I will quilt earlier in the day knowing that she's coming later in the afternoon. A typical week, I would say, I don't know if there is such a thing as a typical week. I don't get started with long arm quilting quite so early in the morning because I'm doing some schooling or life skill things with Stephen, usually in the morning. Usually in the mornings when I'm doing a little bit of cleaning, and I'm getting our routine set up for the day, and then I'll usually quilt from, I would say, 11 a.m., 12 noon on through, and I usually try to go into the evening until I finish a quilt. I'll stop and make lunch, have lunch with Stephen. I'll stop and make dinner, and have, if Greg's home for dinner, sometimes he's got evening appointments being an insurance agent. Sometimes he's gone in the evening. So at least Stephen and I will sit down. Daniel, if he's home, we'll sit down and have dinner sometimes. It's kind of changed over the years. I mean, when the kids were all home, we ate lunch together every day, we ate dinner together every day, and just as families change, things change. So I quilt 3 or 4 days a week. I have one day fit into the schedule where if we've got doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, haircut, I need to meet clients, I'll do that on one day of the week, and I do all of those at one time. I do run to the post office usually twice a week. That's in the opposite direction of where all of our dentist and doctor appointments are. It's the town that's closest to me, but it's not the town that all of the bigger things go on in. So Stephen and I will run to town a couple times a week, and we're a good 15-20 minutes from town. Again, we're in the country, so it's a good hour by the time we get to town, and I may do a pickup order. I tend to do more pickup orders than I do actual shopping these days. And then we'll get back home, so that's a little time out of my day. So it really varies. I try to set times. I'm not very good with those parameters, and I will bleed over into the evening. If I finish a quilt earlier in the day, I'll load another one and get going with the next one and try to get as much done as I can, but it's not set hours, which is good and which is bad. I mean, by having a room in my home, if somebody stops by for a visit, I'm not going to say, oh, sorry, I can't visit. I'm running the long arm right now. The long arm will finish the row it's on. I'll visit for a while, and then I may work later into the evening if somebody stopped during the day, or if I know somebody's coming over in the evening, I'll work more in the daytime. So it's very flexible. Sometimes that can hurt. If you've ever had a business in your home, it kind of takes over. It's got advantages, but it's got some disadvantages as well. So I don't have set hours. I do it till it's done, and I try to fit within. That's one of the things I'm trying to work on better in 2025 is to have certain days that I film, certain days that I edit, certain days that I'm quilting, and try to really stick to that schedule more. But I've just found that if I set a week of 5 days and this is everything I'm going to do every day, one day of that week is going to get messed up somehow. So I've got to build in some margin time in there somewhere. But another question was, how do you manage to complete so many quilts in a week? And again, I have really trimmed down the number of quilts I'm trying to get done in a week because I was feeling so overwhelmed. Especially when a large number came in at once and I was seeing this continuous line just building and building, and that's where I really went to a cue that I'm only scheduling this many quilts a week. And so that when a client sends in a quilt, then they know I am already booked out 8 weeks because I can only guarantee this many quilts a week because I have to keep that family time. I have to have that time with my husband or time to, just do daily things. I can't be doing this 24 hours a day. And there were times late last year, early this year when that was really becoming part of it. And I just had to scale back. And So I only schedule so many quilts a week. I do try to schedule in 1 week every couple of months that's just a catch-up week that either I don't do any quilting if I'm caught up on where I need to be, or I use that time to like, okay, now I can catch my breath. I've got to finish these last few quilts that are in the queue that were scheduled that I didn't get done in weeks earlier than that. So I I honestly, I don't feel that I get as many done as I should a lot of times. I feel like in many ways I'm inefficient in ways, but then I hear from others of you that say, wow, how did you get it all done? So I don't know, it's just a balancing act. I'm never going to please everybody all the time, because some, it's like I should be doing more. Others, how do you do it all? I don't do it all. I can't get it all done. But that's kind of how that works. And then Kathy had asked, how do you schedule your work time, personal sewing, meal prep, chores, couple time, life work balance? And I just have to say I've kind of touched on all of those already. It is a fluid thing. It is a constant revamping. Because I had so many children and we homeschooled, all of those kids were here every day, and we planned out our days. I was not a person that just said free for all. It's like we had a schedule. I did English with Emily and Maggie at this time, while the boys were doing science on the computer at this time. And so we had spots, we had time frame, we had more I would say a routine than an actual times. We worked through a routine throughout the day. So I've tried to carry some of that same thing over into my business, that this is the time that I read emails and answer those. Then this is my quilting time. And then this is my personal time. You've heard me talk about my personal sewing. A lot of times that's on Friday night. I try to keep Saturdays for that as well. Sometimes that doesn't always work. But I always, if there are family events going on, those family events take precedent, and then I'll do my quilting in the outside hours. So if I know, and the other thing that's in there is church is never an option for me either. We're in church Sunday morning and Sunday night and Wednesday night every week, and those are not options. I don't. So I may quilt sometimes on Sunday afternoon, or Sunday afternoon I may finish up my newsletter. Sometimes you'll see that comes out late Sunday afternoon, and that's because I'm working on it in between. But I'm never skipping church to do quilting. I'm never skipping church to to finish up something. That's a priority in our life, and our faith is a priority, and so I'm putting that and family, and then the quilting comes after that. And quilting probably comes before most cleaning chores in my house, honestly. I don't know if I should admit that or not, but that, really, I'll put quilting ahead of some of the cleaning chores that need to go on. So I guess it's priorities. Where do I rank the priorities? My faith, my family would come first. And I would say the business, the quilting kind of comes in there. My personal sewing would come in after my business sewing. Cleaning would come in somewhere down there. Meal prep is in there, but I'm a pretty simple meal prep person. A meat and a vegetable, and I'm good, and I kind of, there were years where it was more elaborate, but so I don't know if that answers any questions. That kind of just gives you a glimpse into me. That's me. I love to plan. I don't always get my plan worked the way I want it to, but I probably get more done than I would if I just left it as a free-for-all. I keep lists. I have lists everywhere. I love the Silk and Sonder planner, and I can link that down below. What I like about that planner is that, and I use this for my personal, a little bit for business, but mostly, I use it for business too. Any business appointments and things I list in there. The Silk and Sonder, Silk and, is that what it's called? Silk and Sonder. I think that's what it's called. Oh, I have one right here. Yeah, I was right. Silk and Sonder. So I love this planner. It's a little expensive, but what I like, it's monthly. So I don't have this big planner that I'm carrying around. I have a thin one for each month. And so I guess it's kind of like, it's that adrenaline, I guess, that comes when you got a blank, clean planner again, and I get that at the beginning of each month. So each week in this is given two full spreads. So without getting, so sometimes I do better than others. I don't know if I should even show this, but so you're given two full spreads for a month, or for each week. So each one of these comes as a month, and each week I have, and I didn't do very good on this one, but this one has weekly goals. It has activity or habit trackers. It's got a meal plan, and you can see I kind of have a little bit written there. It has other areas for different things, and I've used different stuff, shopping list, but then on the next page is a full spread for each day. This is Monday through Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday are on the next one. So I add all my appointments in here. I keep to-do list in here. Sometimes it's by time. Other times it's just a list of this is what needs to be done this day. I got, like, at the top here it says Monday, and it says darks. That's because I do my dark laundry on Monday. And on Tuesday it says darks because I do another load of dark laundry on Tuesday. Wednesday it says whites because on Wednesday I do a white load. So chores like that I do kind of divide out over the week. Mondays is supposed to be dusting. I follow the Clean Mama routine, and I'll link her down below too. And so that's how I do my cleaning. So I post that on here. This has a place where you can mark the weather for the day. So sometimes I have it listed where it's times and I'm putting in appointments. Other times I'm just listing things that need to be done that day. There's lots of blank pages in here too, and so I keep track of that. There's a lot of motivational stuff in here. Money tracker, there's always a recipe, and I've used the recipes in here before. There's always reviewing the month before, making plans for the next month. So there's mood tracker, habit trackers. Some months I use them, some months I don't. But I love this planner. It's a new start each month, and so I'll link that down below if you're interested in that. That kind of keeps me straight, and I like it that it's small enough I can put it in my purse. I put it in my bag anywhere I go. And I keep track of everything that way. So enough about planning. I hope that helps you in some way. Let's move on to my third area. Let's just move on to some long arm techniques, equipment, that kind of thing. June asked me, what is your setup for cutting battings for your quilts? Do you cut several in a typical or basic size, or do you cut specific for each quilt? Is the cutting done on the floor, or do you have a workspace or cutting? So battings, you see my roll of battings. There's one there, there's one over there. I cut battings specific to quilts, and so when a quilt is sent in, I measure it, and then I cut the width 8 inches wider than the quilt. And I have two different sizes of battings. I have king and queen. So if the length of the quilt fits within the queen measurement, I do not trim off the length of it. I just cut that whole width and then put that on the long arm, and any extras, that's what I trim off and I use for, tucking behind my bars back here, or for whatever. I mean, they're just scraps after that. I only charge the client for the amount of batting that I actually use. So if their quilt is 60 by 60, I'm only charging the client for batting that is 68 by 68. So the scraps that are cut off, the client is not paid for. I mean, those were just what's left at the end of the whole roll. So I do try to use the most efficient roll that I have. I mentioned in my sewing room tour that over here I had some smaller rolls that were 60-inch wide, and I was trying that. And sometimes your quilt will fit in that, sometimes it won't. And so I don't know what I'm doing is seeing whether, do I use that more, am I able to cut that one and be more efficient than cutting, that's a king roll. Yeah. Is that a queen? Yeah, you can't see behind the long arm. There's a queen roll that just came in yesterday, and so I'm always trying to use the most efficient size in cutting. But so if it's a 70 by 80 quilt, I'll cut that from the queen roll. If it gets larger, a queen comes to 94, so the quilt can't be any longer than is that right? 94, 96. So the quilt can't be any longer than 88 at the most if it's 96. I'll start cutting from the king roll to do that. So I do cut specific for each quilt. Is the cutting done on the floor? Yes, it's done on the floor. It's done on a hardwood floor. So I will bring the batting roll to the middle of between the machines, roll it out, and I use I have a long pink, it's in my cart over there, but it's the 100 centimeter or 100 inch measuring tape, and I'll measure, I'll unroll, continue to measure just like they would do when you're cutting fabric, and then I have batting scissors, and what's nice on a hardwood floor is I've got straight lines, and so I'll use my batting scissors and I'll cut straight down that line. So I do it on a hardwood floor. It'd be much harder if it was on carpet. And I do keep my rolls, stacked up vertical there, and then I bring them out and lay them out horizontal. I know some people would have them stored under there, or they have a separate work table. I just don't have the room for that with two long arms. So I do cut them specific to size, and I do cut them on the floor. Melissa asks, when long arming, do you prefer a horizontal or a vertical pieced backing? I prefer a horizontal, just because then that seam hits this bar all at the same time. It's rotated one time through. A vertical seam on the long arm continues to build up in that same area. I still work with it, but if I had my preference, I would say a horizontal seam. But I know money-wise, sometimes that vertical seam is less expensive for you to piece, and so I will work with either one. Kay asked me, what type of thread, brand, and weight do you mostly use for top and in the bobbin? Do you match the weight of thread in both? So I mostly use Omni thread, and this is a brand new spool that's come. So Omni thread is put out by Superior Threads. This is a poly wrapped poly, and it is in 40 weight. Okay. Then in my bobbins, I do not match the weight in the bobbins. I actually use a 60 weight in the bobbin. I use the MagnaGlide pre-wound bobbins. I buy them by the box in certain colors, and so this is 40 weight. So I do not match the weight on them. My advice, I think you need to find the thread that works best for you. People swear by other brands. I've tried other brands. I tend to come back to the Omni. I like, it's like personalities. You get along with some people better than others, and for some reason, my machine, we get along better with Omni thread. And I do use others occasionally, and I work with that. But I think once you find a brand and that works well with your machine, I think it's best to stick with one brand, whatever that brand is. Omni just happens to be the one that I use. And so it is 60 weight on the top. No, it's a 40 weight on the top and a 60 weight on the bottom for my bobbins. Okay, answered that one. Brand and size of needles used. All right. I use, I have taken some, let me back up. I have taken some of MK Quilts down in Florida. She has a MK University, is that what she called, a quilt university? Long arm classes online, tons and tons. And she's a handy quilter, dealer, educator, all of that from her shop down there. She suggests using ballpoint needles, and I have kind of stuck with that. So I use ballpoint needles. I buy the Gross Beckert ballpoint needles. Again, I'm one of these people, if something works, I don't fix it. I don't run out and buy the next best thing all the time. rarely, honestly. And this comes across in a lot of my quilting supplies. It comes across in all of my life, honestly. I'm still filming on a iPhone 10. So I have a new Mac, but I'm still filming on an iPhone 10, and my kids keep telling me I need to upgrade to the next one. I don't know. Our personalities, my husband and I, we're just a little slower to move to something new, and so I'm not one that this works for me, and so I stick with it. The Omni thread works for me, and so I stick with it. If at any point it gets to the point they're not working for me and I need to find something different, I'll look, and I may trade. And occasionally I do try something different to see if it works better, but then I always come back. Not always, but then I come back. Binding tool. I used the same binding tool for a long time, and then one time in a Sew Sampler box they sent another one, and I started using that one, and I switched. It's like, nope, this one is so much better. So I'm not one that, once something works for me, I kind of stick with that unless I see a reason to change, or if somebody really swears by something new and I need to change. So at this point I'm using ballpoint needles. I keep it in my machine all the time. I really only change a needle if for some reason I'm using a specialty thread, or if I can tell that needle, it's time to change it, okay? I don't change with every quilt. MK quilts, they teach you don't have to change as often as it's said. Everybody needs to do what they feel led to do. I don't change my needle with every quilt. I really only change it once I see that it needs to be changed, when it starts having some difficulty and I know my thread's breaking, tension's not right, there's something going on there, and needle is one of the first things I check. So needle size. Now, Superior Threads is the maker of Omni Thread, and they have on their website, and I'll link this down below, they have a Longarm machine thread reference guide. So it lists all of their threads that they sell, tells you the weight, what it's recommended for, a description of it, and then it gives a recommended needle size. And years ago they had this set up for whatever machine you had. And so at the time I had a Handy Quilter 16, and it would show you all of the threads and the needle size they suggested for each specific machine. I don't think they any longer do this, but in looking at this sheet, where now it's kind of a generic all long arm machines, you may need to adjust it for yours. But the recommendation that I see on this newest one is the same recommendation that I had on the Handy Quilter one from years ago. So for the Omni thread, it suggests a recommended needle size of 18. And so that's what I have. I have the ballpoint needles in size 18. That's what I keep in my machine all the time. I keep, several things of it. I keep them on hand, so if I need to change, that's what's worked for me. And, I don't tend to do a lot of research into what's the newest, greatest, what's everybody talking about. I'm just not that kind of a person. This is what works for me. This is what we're going to stick with until I see a need to change it. So that's what I'm working with. And brand and size of needles, I did that one. Okay, Shelly asked me, which Omni thread colors do you use? I didn't bring all of them with me, but my top ones would be Omni Natural White. It would also be the Omni Cream, Omni Light Gray, Omni Medium Gray. Those are probably the top 4. I do also have some other shades of beige. Sandstone is one I use. Beige is one I've used. So I would say if you just want to start out, I would get the Natural White, and I would get a cream and a gray. Really start out. That can cover so many quilts. If you're wanting to narrow down and really try to match a quilt top better, you may do into a sandstone or into a beige. And some of them don't have names, but they have numbers, and just follow along on my videos. I'll mention every once in a while a different color that I use, but for 75% of the time I'm using Natural White, cream, and a light gray. And so those are the colors that I use. Size needle, I talked about that. Why do you prefer Magna Glide over Super Bobs? All right, so Again, Magna Glides were suggested to me first, and before that I wound all my own bobbins, but then I learned of Magna Glides, and so that was one of those things like, okay, this sounds promising, let me try these. And when I tried them, I have not gone back to winding my own bobbins unless I need to match a certain color that I don't have in the bobbins. I was not even aware of super bobs. So when I got this question, I went searching super bobs, what are they? So super bobs is a pre-wound bobbin that is sold by Superior Threads. Now, in looking at it, why I probably will not buy super bobs is because, not that they're not good, but I'll just tell you why I prefer the Magna Glides. Magna Glides have a magnetic core. So this is the core, I don't know if I can show you, inside the Magna Glides. This is magnetic, this black part right here. So when I put this in my bobbin case and I put it into my machine, it is a magnet to keep the bobbin smoothly. So instead of, and looking at super bobs, they look like they are just either just a plastic cover on the edge, or not even a plastic, maybe just a cardboard cover on the two sides of it. The Magna Glides come, there's no cardboard on either side. They are wound tight. They are, I just love them. I don't know, there's nothing needed on the sides. They have that magnetic core, so when it goes in, it magnetizes to the back of that bobbin case, that section, and it gives a smooth, the thread comes off it very smooth because the bobbin is not moving back and forth like this. That is magnetized to there, so it's keeping a very smooth pull off of the bobbin thread. I have really enjoyed these. So after looking at the super bobs, I really don't feel a need to switch over to that or to even try them. I like the magnetic core. For a long time, now Handy Quilter will say you should take the spring out of your bobbin case. For a long time I did not. Most recently I have started taking I have popped that spring out. The reason I did not at first is because if I wound my own bobbins, I didn't want to have to figure out how to put that spring back in and then put my other bobbin back in. So for a long time I just left that spring in there. The thread does get caught sometimes when I'm pulling it up to trim the threads. It'll get caught on that spring sometimes. And so, I don't know, several months ago I finally did remove the springs in both of my machines in the bobbin case, and it's been running fine, and I just know now if I wind my own bobbins I've got to put that spring back in. So that's my reasoning why using the Magna Glides. I've really liked it. I like that magnetic core in there. They do have a program where you can save these magnetic cores and send them back to them, and so I do save the majority of the cores, and then and if I buy a box like this, then in the bottom of the box there's a card that just tells you information on how to send it back. You just fill the box back up. It takes a long time to fill a box because, you know, these cores, you know, they're just very, very small compared to the size of the bobbin, so it takes a long time to fill up a box, but that's why I have stuck with the Magna Glides. Jennifer asked, what size stitch length do you use, and does it change based on the pantograph? I almost always keep them on 12. Both machines are set on 12. There were some quilts a couple months ago, you might remember me talking about that they were very detailed pantographs, and I did drop the stitch length to 14 on those just so that I was making sure I was getting in all the details. That's very rare. I almost always keep everything on 12. Sandy asked, do you trim the quilts while they are on the long arm? If not, why not? I used to. So you can kind of see a quilt right here now. I used to trim the quilt right up to, I would trim off the batting and the backing right flush with the quilt top when I was finished. It's super easy. It's taut, you know, so like the back bar, the quilt, once I finished quilting, I would trim the bottom of it here. And then I would just roll off a certain section of it and trim. That whole side of it's being held by the bars for me, so I would trim it and trim both sides. After a time I felt like they're not, I think it's harder to get them square by trimming them straight off the long arm. And so sometimes quilts aren't square when they're on the long arm. I'm just telling you. They're just not square, whether it's the piecing or whatever it is. It's just, they're not totally square. So I did begin trimming. So now what I do is I will trim up outside the stitching. I always stitch off my quilts. I do not stitch right to the edge of the quilt top. I stitch off of my quilts a couple of inches. So I will trim the quilt to the outside of that stitching so that I still have a couple inches all the way around the quilt top, and then I will take it down to the floor with my large rulers, and I will actually square up the quilt with my large rulers and my rotary cutter. And so that's, I think you can, especially if you're doing your own personal quilts and you're not concerned about making sure it's square. Even with laying them on the floor, I think it's sometimes hard to get a quilt square. I do my very best, but I don't want to say I'm an expert at it at all. But it is a service I provide because I find that most people don't have a large enough area to even trim their quilts. So, and especially once you get older, it gets harder and harder to get down on the floor or to have a space big enough. So I do offer that service. I do my very best to get it square. I think if you're quilting your own quilts and you just want to trim them flush with the quilt top when you're pulling them off the long arm, I think it's perfectly fine. And I did that for many, many years. So great question. How do you attach binding with the long arm? I do not. And my reasoning is, one, I'm ready to get the next quilt on there. Secondly, when you're attaching binding with a long arm, you still have to continue to rotate. So if you can imagine, if I'm, this quilt's in the middle, if I'm attaching binding, if you finished a quilt and let's say you started at the bottom to attach the binding, I had attached it across the bottom and as far up the sides as I can, and then I've got to rotate that quilt, and then I've got to attach it down this side, and I got to attach it down this side, and then I got to rotate the quilt. So I feel like I'm taking all this time to rotate the quilt. I can't do it in long sections except for the top and the bottom, so all of those down the sides. And so personally, I have just decided I would rather pull that quilt off, put the next quilt on the long arm, and then I will add the binding with the domestic machine. I always stitch binding to the front and then hand stitch it to the back side if I'm doing the full binding. So it's one of those things, again, my binding process works for me. I have not found the need to attach the binding on the long arm. If it's something that you want to become proficient at and do, there are many, many people that do, and I think it's absolutely wonderful. For me, it's just not something that I want to spend the time to learn, and I want to move on to the next quilt. So thank you for that question, though. Michelle says, do you have any tips or tricks on how to load the long arm quickly? I've used the red snappers but didn't have success. I'm considering magnets. So I used to always pin my quilts to the leaders, and so you can see a little bit of the leader sticking out here. So I used to always pin my quilts to the leaders. When I bought this machine, I bought it used from a lady who'd only had it about a year, and she had the red snappers. So the red snappers came with the machine. So I started using them. And for those of you who are not familiar, I brought a little bit of them to show you. Red snappers come in 3 lengths. You have the smaller ones. I use these just to position the quilt, the edges of the quilt, and you snap it. There's a little red tubing that would run through the leader here. So when on your leaders, you would have to make a casing. I don't think they come with, maybe they come with a casing already. I can't remember, it's been a while. But I sewed, I don't know if you can see it right there, a pink thread right there, made my casing a little smaller. And I'm thinking the casing is already on the edge, but I made my casing smaller. So I did stitch a pink line all the way across there to make that casing smaller, because that red tubing that runs through there is not very big. It's that big. So and I liked that I did it in pink. I saw that on somebody's suggestion many, many years ago. That way I can see that line. I then match my edge of my quilt top to that pink line, and then I position it with usually 3. I have one in the middle, one on either end. And then your other red snappers come in 2 lengths. This is the shorter one, and then there's the longer one. So you have enough to actually do red snappers on all three bars. I use red snappers on the back bar and on the front bar, but I pin my quilt top. I don't use red snappers on my quilt top. I like to pin my quilt top. So that means I have an extra set. I have enough to do one more long bar. So I only have one set of red snappers, and I've not invested in a second one, even though I have a second machine. But so what I have done is I have a red tubing on this one. So on this machine, I actually do red snappers on the back bar, but I pin the backing to the front bar. On the other machine, I have red snappers on both the front bar and the back bar. And then I pin the quilt top on both of them. So if I purchased another set of red snappers, I'd be able to have a full set of red snappers on both of them. I just have not done it. Magnets. I've never tried magnets. I know there are some people that swear by them. The red snappers work for me. I have been looking into another system where you have the zippered leaders, and I kind of like that. And because I could, with a zippered leader, you would attach so your leader would have a big zipper down at the shorter part. You would attach to the quilt top separately, not while it's on the long arm, and then all you do is zip it right onto the leader that's on your long arm. I have looked at that. That does intrigue me. Because I could, while a quilt is stitching out here, I could be attaching that shorter leader to another quilt, and I think my process of loading the second quilt would be much quicker because I could do that preliminary work ahead of time. I've just not invested in it, and it would be a learning curve too, so I just have not done it. Loading a quilt takes time. I mean, sometimes it can be a 45-minute process. It just is. Do I know of a quicker way? Unless you switch to a zipper system, unless the magnets work for you. Since the red snappers didn't work, I think, find somebody that's, maybe go into a quilt store that rents long arm time or something like that, and see if they have magnets and try them out. See if that's something that you like, or have them demonstrated to you so you can see if it's something that you would like to do. I know those magnets are super tight. I don't know, something about it scares me a little bit that they're not quite as stable, but again, I just haven't tried them. I don't know. So I don't have a good answer there. It's part of the time of long arm quilting. It just takes some time, and it's frustrating at times that it takes so long. But you do want to get them straight. So whatever you're doing, it just needs to be a straight job. So magnets would be great. I would just try them out first and before investing in them. See if there's somebody that you can watch. You can try them out. You could even, say, can I practice loading a quilt on there so I can even see if it's a process that I enjoy or not. All right. Next one. When using Cuddle Minky fabric for backing, do you attach the selvage side or the cut side to your leaders? 95% of the time I attach the selvage side to my leaders. You're going to have to deal with the stretch of it one way or the other. So if I prefer the selvage on the leaders because then I know I'm straight, and then I do have to deal with some of the stretch along the sides as I'm rotating the quilt. I think that, to me, that's a lot easier. I have done it the other way, depending on if a quilt top is not going to fit one direction and I have to load the stretchiness, the cut side onto the leader bars. It's doable, but you're going to have to watch that stretch. You don't want to stretch that whole side out and it be out of proportion. So preference is the selvage for me, but again, it just takes some practice. So, all right. This one, I don't have a person's name, but it says, could you talk a little bit about getting over the fear of picking out and quilting a pantograph over the quilt? I'm used to hand quilting and trying to match the blocks, but pantographs seem to go across the blocks. I'm afraid to stitch over the pieces in the blocks. Could you share advice on this? My biggest advice with this is in doing digital pantographs or even anything that's not custom, I think you have to look at the quilt as a whole picture and not. And now that I do that, I have a hard time seeing just the blocks and picking out a pantograph. If I had to do custom quilting, I wouldn't know where to start because I don't see individual blocks. I think you need to lay out the quilt and just look at it as one big picture, one big portrait, if you want to say, and what design would look nice over this entire picture, and don't narrow down to just things. So it may be you have to lay it out somewhere and take a large picture of it, and then just look at the whole picture. Step away from it, lay it out on a bed and go to the edge of the room and look at the whole quilt. Maybe when you finish a quilt, you're going to have to set it aside for a while, because I feel like at times when I've met with clients and they're like, I am so sick of this quilt, I don't think you're going to be able to do anything with it. It's because they've been this close to the quilt for months, sometimes years. And they're away from it for a couple months, and I bring it back and it's quilted, and they're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe how nice this quilt is. It's not that I did any, the quilting adds some, but I think it's just getting away from that quilt for a while. So if you've just finished piecing a quilt and you're still seeing blocks, I would lay it out away from you a while, maybe hang it on a design board across the room for a while, fully put together, across the back of a couch, out on a bed, take a picture of it out on the floor somewhere, and just look at the picture as a whole, and just try to pull yourself back away from that and seeing the whole thing as a portrait and not the individual blocks. So I hope that helps. Kathy sent a question, says, several months ago, someone sent in small quilts, about 12 inches square. There were 4 of them. How did you set up a project like that? How did you set up a project like that on the Longarm? So it depends on whether the backing is all the same. If the backing is all the same, then my throat space would fit a 12-inch block in between there. And so if the backing is all the same and it's wide enough, big enough, let's say, I could load the backing on there and I could do each individual quilt. So I could have one quilt here, and I would probably, what I would do is I would pin the quilt, pin that first 12-inch to this bar, and I would do the basting, I would do the quilting on that one, and then I would unpin it from this leader. And then I would do, but I wouldn't move the backing fabric at all. I would then just go down to the next part. That next 12-inch block, I would pin it to the leader, and then do the quilting on that one. You get to the bottom, you unpin it, you finish quilting, and then this bar is then free again to load the next one. So if it's all the same backing fabric, I would do one and then put the next one on there. I would not pin them all on there at the same time. And then when I'm doing it, I'm setting, so I would pin the first one on there and quilt it. I'm setting my area on the computer, for each quilt. I'm not using that same area. So I would mark my corners, create my area, put in my pantograph design, stitch that out. When I'm moving on to the next one, I'm clearing my screen and I'm setting my area again for this quilt and stitching that out. If they each have separate battings, then it's backing fabrics, then it's just like any quilt. It's just smaller. You're just loading each one different. But that's how I would do if I had multiple ones, all using the same backing, as each one is done separately. Now you could, let's say you had 4 pieces, maybe they're 4 square pillow tops, and each one has the same pantograph on it. And if they are the same size, where, if I had 4 12-inch ones and I could put them all on there, baste each one of them down, and I could set that entire pass all along all 4 quilts at once, as long as each one of the sides is basted down so that my machine's not going to get caught as it comes over to the next quilt. But you could do, if you're doing the same pantograph on all 4 of them, you could have all 4 of them lined up there and do them all at once, but those 4 that she's referring to, I remember them. They were much smaller. They were all laundry basket ones, and each one had a different pantograph. So I'm really, and I really think each one of those had different backings. So each one was loaded separately. But if they all had the same backing, you could do them all. Just leave the backing in place and do each one separately like that. So hope that helps. You can send me a comment or an email if that was not enough information there. So where do you purchase your thread, especially the pre-wound bobbins? I told you what I used. I actually purchased my thread through Checker Distributors. That is, I have a business account. You do have to have a business to be able to purchase through them. I do purchase my threads my threads, not my bobbins. I'm not sure if they care if Checkers has the Magna Glides, and so I do have a business account also with Habendash, Filtech, I think, and that's a business account as well, and that's where I purchase the whole boxes. But you can check your, Fat Quarter Shop. I know Fat Quarter Shop sells Omni. I don't know if they sell the Magna Glide bobbins or not. I'll look, and if I can find them, I'll link them down there below. But I would say check your handy quilter, check your long arm dealer. Sometimes if you've got a dealer in your area that doesn't just sell one brand, but sells lots of brands of machines, they usually have a pretty good selection of long arm quilting thread there as well. So you might check that. But that's how I do. I do run a business, so I'm purchasing my thread at wholesale prices. Stitch length, we talked about that. Okay, talked about that one. All right, let's move on to photography here. So what is your setup for getting such bright, clear photos of quilts after you have quilted them? Any tips for photographing quilts? Okay, so my setup is I have a covered porch, and so on nice days I take the quilts outside and lay them on that porch to take pictures of them. So my key is don't do it in direct sunlight. It needs to be a filtered light, or the quilt, when I take pictures, I am doing it under that covered porch. So either it's a bright day, but I don't do it if there's any sun shining on that part of the porch. I will wait until the sun has moved off the porch, but it's still bright enough that it's brightening up that area. A cloudy day can work if it's not dismal, if it's not a dreary day. If it's a cloudy day, then sometimes those are better because it's a filtered light. Those clouds are really filtering out that light, and I can take a picture at a time of day when I normally couldn't if the sun was out, because the sun would be shining on that portion of the porch. So I have not had good results with taking them indoors. Even though I have these big lights that I use for filming, I just still have found shadows and things. I just cannot get a good picture inside. So I brave the winter weather, clear off the porch, take pictures outside if I can. Sometimes I have to save quilts for a couple days because it's just so dreary and rainy and I can't get out there to take pictures. And sometimes you'll see some of the pictures are a little dark, and that's probably why. It's like I'm under a time crunch. I need to get these out and I've got to get pictures taken of them. So I do pictures on both photo and on portrait mode. I really like portrait mode for pictures. I kind of have a list of pictures that I want each time I go out, and I've kind of honed that down over the years that I've done picture taking. Is I want a picture of the whole quilt. I usually do one with the backing folded over so you can see the backing fabric as well. Then I try to get in closer where you can see the pantograph or a block or block intersection. I like portrait where you can see, focusing on a block up close, but you can kind of see the quilt in the background. But lighting is your biggest thing. If you're going to do it outside, you can do it in front of big bright windows. Maybe if this machine wasn't here, I'd be able to do it on the floor right here. I've tried pictures in the middle of the floor between the two machines. Even though I've got an overhead light and I'll use my big lights that I use for filming, it's just not bright enough, and I get shadows different ways. So you can try it inside, but it's still, I would be by a window, not in direct sunlight, but a filtered light of some sort. You could use like a sheer curtain maybe to get rid of the direct sunlight, but don't do it in direct sunlight. It never turns out well. I know that seems like it should. It doesn't. Direct sunlight just does not work. It needs to be that filtered light. So a covered place, someplace outside. I like to do it on the hard surface. So even though we've got some filtered light, some under some trees and things, I don't like the quilts on the grass. I just think they give it a bubbly, uneven feel. I like the hard surface, and so putting them on the porch works for me. Next one. Do your customers ever send photos of their quilts on display in their homes? Occasionally. I would love to see more. Sometimes I've had customers send me pictures of when they gave that quilt to the recipient or whatever. I love to see those. So they're welcome. You're welcome to send pictures of quilts on display, at the ones that I've done things, but so occasionally. All right, let's move on to binding. Donna says, I hate binding. Sometimes it turns out beautifully and other times the edge looks chewed. What am I doing wrong? Any tips to improve binding? Then Michelle asked a similar question. I messed up twice using a binding tool, so now I use the old-fashioned method of folding one piece over another. My problem is with the corners. They end up looking lumpy and distorted. Any ideas on what I might be doing wrong? So I first learned binding when I was first learning to quilt, and that was with Lynette Jensen of Thimbleberries, and she did at the time did the binding where you got where the two pieces met. So when you started out, you folded a little bit okay, let me just start over here. Lynette Jensen would teach either a straight, she actually taught a mitered edge, and you would fold over the very top of that. You'd sew all the way around. When your next piece came, you would miter that piece as well, and you would stick it down in that pocket of where you started at, and then you would stitch that down. And that's the way I did it for years and years. And that may be what Michelle's referring to, where it's kind of lumpy. It does create an extra lump because you've got extra fabric right there. So at some point I began using the binding tool, where you're actually sewing those last two pieces together, so it's a seam just like all of the others. And I really like the binding tool rather than pushing it inside the other. So Michelle, when you're asking the question, it seems lumpy and distorted, especially in the corners. I would say that you've got some, without seeing it, I'm not for sure, but in the corners, it's always a pain if you've got a seam in a corner. So if you're joining strips that way, well, two things. Another thing is I like to have the mitered pieces. So if I'm joining binding pieces and I have the right side up here, and then I'll lay the right sides together and stitch a diagonal line across that and fold that open, I like that much better than just a straight seam. I feel like the straight seam gives you too much of a bulk right there. So you might try a diagonal edging, a diagonal connection there. So then if you do that diagonal line, then when you press that out, you've got the diagonal. And I think that hits then when you're binding, that kind of like I talked about on the long arm, that seam is spread across that binding and not just all in one spot on your binding. So you might try that, is the mitered joining instead of just a straight seam. And then try in your binding corners, in the corners of your binding, not to have a seam there. Whether it's the mitered or the straight, try not to have a seam on the binding. Sometimes you just can't help it. You'll start out, you'll think, okay, I'm okay. And you start putting it on and you realize you've got a seam there. But that, in my experience, is what has made a corner kind of lumpy, is that there's a seam in the binding that I'm attaching it to right there. So I hope that helps. In Donna's question that the edge looks chewed, I'd almost wonder if the binding strips that you're cutting are on a bias and not on the straight of grain. Because I'm just guessing at this, but I have found at times when my fabric, it can twist a little bit, especially if I'm doing a bias binding, and if your fabrics aren't on the straight of grain, then as you're folding that to the back side, sometimes those fabrics can feel twisted or look twisted a little bit, and maybe that's what you mean by chewed. I'm trying to picture chewed, not that there's bites out of it, but that it's kind of not straight. It's kind of wobbly. That may be something that making sure you're cutting binding strips from the straight of grain and not on the bias, and maybe that would help. Any other tips on improving binding? Practice. I don't know. You can, when I've taught others binding, or when I was teaching Maggie binding, I would have her do a small baby quilt until she got proficient at that. I didn't give her bigger quilts to do until she felt really comfortable doing smaller quilts. So you could do it with table runners, or just squares, and just practice with old pieces of binding until And I got better at binding myself when I had to then explain it to somebody else. So just really watching every step in your process, is my seam straight? Am I attaching this at the same spot? Am I leaving too much in my in the casing, or do I need to do a scant quarter or a 3/8 instead of a quarter? And try different things, and it's just practice, practice, practice. And if you have any other questions on that or any more explanation that I could help better, just let me know. All right, I think I have been through just about all the questions. I have one more. This one, I don't have a name. It says, I have noticed in many of your videos that I can see a beautiful flowering bush through your window, and I would love to know what it is. It looks like it may have a pink bloom, but it is so pretty. So right now it is all brown, but that is a hydrangea bush. I planted that years ago, and it gets as tall as the house, and then we have to cut it back, and then it grows again. We love that hydrangea bush. We most years take cuttings off of it and dry them, and then we have those around the house for all winter long. And but it is a hydrangea bush. If you know hydrangeas, they can change depending on the pH of the soil. So usually it has white blooms. We've never had blue ones, but pink ones, sometimes you'll see pink on that, and it's just the pH of the soil changes. I don't know what causes that. It could be roof runoff, or something has changed the pH level of the soils, and so that's how you get different colored hydrangea bushes, is depending on the soil. So it is a hydrangea bush. Because this was our bedroom prior to it being the long arm room, I've always enjoyed that big bush right there, because it feels like I have sunlight, but I have something pretty to look at, and it's a good privacy type of thing too. So I've always enjoyed that. So hydrangea, and always like that. So I think I'm through all of the questions. Thank you so much for everyone who sent those in. I so appreciate all your questions. If you have others, feel free to put it in the comments. I always try to answer comments. Sometimes I'm several weeks behind, just depending on what's going on. I hope I explain things well enough. I know I don't have answers for everything. I have so much more to learn from so many others, but this is a snippet of where I'm at this time, how I'm accomplishing things, what's working for me on the long arm, products I'm currently using. Anything I mentioned, I will try to link down below. So if you go below this video, you'll see the very top of description, and then it'll say more. If you click on more, it drops down that whole box. And I put links in there as often as I can, so that you have that convenience of just clicking on it and going straight to that product or a website that I've talked about, or a company. So I'll link as many as I can that I can find links for you to find those products or those people. And I hope this was a help to you today, and I pray that your new year is full of blessing, good health, and lots of family memories. And I will be back here next week, because I have more customer quilts to share with you, and hopefully some of my own personal sewing to share next week. So join me next week, because every quilt is worth finishing. We'll see you then.